From 1974 to 1980, the biggest audio companies on Earth went to war. They built monsters weighing nearly 100 pounds, melded power grids, and bankrupted their competition. History tells us they were fighting for better sound, that they were chasing the holy grail of high fidelity. History is wrong. The war for sound quality didn't start in 1974. It ended in 1966. And this box right here, it won it. This video isn't about watts. It's about two forgotten geniuses. H.C. Lin and Bart Locanthi solved the mystery of distortion a decade before the first monster receiver was ever built. They made perfection cheap. They made it easy. So if perfect sound was already solved by 1966, why did the 70s exist? Why did we need 270 watts of brute force if the fidelity was already maxed out? Because you can't sell quality anymore. You have to sell fear. Welcome to the Power Wars. Look at them, the titans of the golden era, the silver-faced monsters that define vintage audio. We worship the names on the faceplates. Pioneer, Marantz, Sansui. We argue endlessly about which one is better, which one sounds warmer, which one is the king of the hill. But what if I told you that underneath those brushed aluminum faceplates, they are all shockingly similar? What if I told you that the engineering DNA inside a massive 270-watt Pioneer is almost identical to a 40-watt Marantz? And what if I told you that the man responsible for the technology that powered the entire 1970s audio revolution, the man who effectively started the Watt Wars, isn't named Sol Marantz or Nozomu Matsumoto? You've likely never heard his name, but if you own a vintage solid-state receiver, you are listening to his genius every single day. Today, I'm uncovering the unsung godfather of the golden era, Dr. Hong Chung Lin. To understand why H.C. Lin is so important, we have to go back to the 1950s. Tubes were king, but they were hot, fragile, and required massive output transformers to work. The industry desperately wanted to move to transistors, to solid state, but early silicon had a massive problem. To build a proper push-pull amplifier where one transistor handles the top of the sound wave and another handles the bottom, you need two types of transistors that are exact mirror images of each other, an NPN and a PNP. In the 1950s and 60s, making good NPN transistors was easy. They use electrons to carry charge, and electrons move fast. But making a matching PNP transistor? That was a nightmare. PNPs use electron holes to carry charge, which move slowly, about 3 times slower than electrons. To make a PNP fast enough for audio, manufacturers had to make the internal structure razor thin. This made early PNPs incredibly fragile, expensive, and prone to blow up if you even looked at them wrong. So engineers were stuck. They had great NPNs, but garbage PNPs. You couldn't build a reliable, high-power stereo amplifier with mismatched parts. The solid-state revolution was stalled before it really began. Dr. Hong Chung Lin enters the scene. A genius working at RCA Laboratories in the mid-1950s. Lin looked at the PNP problem and realized that trying to force physics to make better PNPs was a dead end. Instead, he cheated physics. In 1956, Lin invented the Quasi-Complementary circuit. It was a stroke of absolute brilliance. Instead of using big, expensive PNP output transistors for the bottom half of the wave, Lin figured out how to use a smaller, cheaper driver transistor to trick a big, robust NPN transistor into doing the job. Think about what this meant. Suddenly you could build a powerful, reliable amplifier using only the cheap, durable NPN transistors for the heavy lifting. You didn't need the fragile PNPs anymore. Lin kicked the door down for mass production of high-powered, solid-state audio. And company executives in Tokyo were more than excited about the future. But Lin didn't just solve the output transistor problem. Over time, his work evolved into a standardized 3-stage circuit architecture that became the undisputed blueprint for the entire industry. We call it the Lin topology. If you open up almost any receiver from the early 1970s to 1980, this is what you will find. It's a 3-step recipe for amplification. First, the differential pair input. This is the brain. It compares the incoming music signal with the output signal to keep distortion low and the amplifier stable. Second, the voltage amplification stage, or VAS. This is the muscle builder. It takes the tiny input signal and boosts the voltage up high enough to drive the speakers. And third, the output stage, the heavy lifters. This is Lin's quasi-complementary and later fully complementary designs to dump current into your woofers. I'll go over this evolution later when I'm talking about Bart Locanthi when he was at JBL. This basic design, Pioneer used it, Sansui used it, Marantz, Kenwood, Yamaha, they all used it. Why? Because it worked. It was stable, it eliminated heavy output transformers, and more importantly, it was scalable. And that scalability is how H.C. Lin accidentally fathered the infamous power wars of the late 1970s. The Japanese industrial machine realized that Lin's topology was a cookbook recipe. You want to turn a 50-watt receiver into a 100-watt receiver? You don't need to reinvent the wheel, thanks to Lin's design. You just have to increase the power supply rail voltages and bolt in some more of those cheap output transistors. Let's take a look at some of the amazing receivers that were in the power wars.
The Pioneer SX1010 was the first audio receiver that was rated at 100 watts RMS per channel. That same year, Marantz, with its model 2325, topped the Pioneer with 125 watts per channel. So this is kind of the start, 74, of the power wars, of the receiver power wars. So Pioneer and Marantz got off first. The other manufacturers started to come back in 1975. One was a Sansui G-9000, and also Kenwood came out with the KR-9400.
That firmly put them into the power wars.
So as 1976 started, Pioneer came out with the SX1250. The other manufacturers had been trying to catch up to the original SX1010, and they had. Both Sansui and Kenwood had come out with high-powered receivers. Well, now the SX1250 was going to bring to the table 160 watts per channel, as if to say, here, go ahead guys, beat this one. And along with the Pioneer SX1250 came a new company onto the scene of the receiver wars, the Technics SA5760. Again, a monster receiver, 165 watts per channel. And other ones, like the Rotel RX1603 with 180 watts per channel, showed up in 1976. So everybody was getting in on this power wars at this point. So 1977 rolls around. Yamaha comes out with their own monster receiver, the CR3020 at 160 watts per channel. Kenwood comes out with their KR9600, again 160 watts per channel. Then a name most people don't think of when it comes to audio, back then or now, Hitachi. They are the first manufacturer to come out with a 200 watt receiver. Hitachi, the SR2004. And then came the Marantz 2500 at a unbelievable 250 watts per channel into 8 ohms and 330 watts per channel into 4 ohms. And this is 1977. This again is only 3 years out from when the receiver power wars started. So there was massive jumps in power through just a very short period of time.
Next up came the 2500's big brother, the 2600, at 300 watts per channel. A massive 300 watts into 8 ohms. And then the biggest of the biggest boys, the Technics SA-1000. What a way to top off a remarkable 5 years in home audio history. We call this time in the late 70s the golden era of audio, but historians have a more specific name for it, the power wars, the watt wars. Most of us are aware of it, that in the late 70s you had these massive receivers come out, and it didn't matter if it was Pioneer, Sansui, Kenwood, Technics, they were locked in an arms race. Every 6 months, it seemed like, somebody would release a receiver with more watts, more weight, and a higher price tag. But here's the thing nobody tells you. This wasn't a sound quality war. It wasn't a circuit innovation war. It was a brute force attack. If you look under the hood of these massive monsters, and you look under the hood of the more humble 15, 20, 30, 40 watt units, you're going to find the exact DNA. So how did these manufacturers create these monsters? They used the same cookbook they always used, the same circuit designs they always used, but they had to add more ingredients. They're making a bigger batch here of the same thing. They had to have increased rail voltage. So where a small amp may have positive and negative 25 volt rails, a receiver like the Pioneer SX1980 is pushing nearly 100 volts. But high voltage is useless if you can't deliver the current. So they stopped using just one pair of output transistors. They started stacking them. Parallel push-pull, triple push-pull, quadruple push-pull. It's like hitching 8 horses to a wagon instead of 2. It's still a wagon, it just has a lot more horsepower. And to go along with that, you end up needing a transformer the size of a paint can and weighing as much as many mid-size receivers by itself. With increased voltage and increased current, you end up with increased heat. And so they have to have some sort of thermal management. And usually how that was done was with large heat sinks. And that's why some of these receivers grew up to 24 inches wide. They weren't filled with magical new audio circuits. They were filled with aluminum heat sinks. They needed physically massive heat sinks to keep the Lin topology from melting itself down. In addition, some units used fans for additional cooling. To drive home how this was the power wars and not the sound quality wars is looking at the circuitry from Sansui, Marantz, and Pioneer. It was all very similar, again using that Lin topology. Were they exactly the same? No. Pioneer used various multi-stage protection relays in their units. Sansui's focus was on high-speed, wide bandwidth designs, and Marantz, they were focused on specific capacitor choices for voicing. But the proof is in the specifications. If we take a look at the Sansui G-9000 dB specs and compare it to the Marantz 2500 specs and compare those to the Pioneer SX1980 specs, you'll see they are very similar. This shows you that the circuit designs had more similarities to each other than they did differences. None of the manufacturers were trying to reinvent the wheel because at this point in time, the marketing focus was on bigger numbers, more watts, driving inefficient speakers to concert hall levels in your home. It was the spec sheet dominance that they wanted. It was not a sound quality war, it was a power war. Because at this point in audio history, more watts sold more units. The sound quality war was over before it began. When we look back at the monster era of receivers, 1974 to 1980, it's easy to mock the access. The 100-pound chassis, the dimming of house lights when you turn them on, the 270-watt ratings. We often ask, why weren't they focused on sound quality? The answer is one of the great ironies of audio history. They didn't need to fight a sound quality war because Bart Locanthi had already won it for them a decade earlier. Without his work at JBL, which most of us know is a speaker company, overcoming the harsh transistor sound of the 60s, we may have never had the power wars. By the time Pioneer, Marantz, and Sansui began their arms race, the mystery of high-fidelity solid-state amplification had been solved. The blueprint for sonic perfection was no longer a trade secret, thanks to the evolution of the Lin topology by JBL's Bart Locanthi in 1966. It was the industry standard. To understand why Locanthi's contribution was the end of history for amplifier distortion, you have to remember what came before. H.C. Lin's original 1956 quasi-complementary topology was a brilliant solution to a manufacturing problem, but it created a sonic one because it used two NPN transistors to push and pull the signal. The two halves of the waveform were inherently asymmetrical. This created crossover distortion, a nasty, harsh notch at the zero crossing point that the human ear found fatiguing. This was the dreaded transistor sound. As we entered the middle of the 1960s, by now, the issues with the PNP transistors had been solved, so there was no issue building a proper output stage, as the PNP transistors were now the same price and just as reliable as the NPN transistors. In 1966, Bart Locanthi, Vice President of Engineering at JBL, didn't just tweak the Lin topology, he perfected it. With the JBL SA600, he introduced the T-circuit, a full complementary symmetry design. By utilizing newly available PNP silicon transistors, Locanthi created a mirror image circuit. The positive half of the wave and the negative half were handled by transistors that were perfect electrical opposites. The result of this, the notch vanished. Distortion dropped from an audible 0.5 to 1% to a microscopic 0.05% or less. The consequence of this was suddenly a solid-state amplifier could be a straight wire with gain. It was transparent, it was reliable, it was high fidelity. Locanthi's topology didn't stay at JBL. By the mid-1970s, the full complementary design had been reverse engineered, refined, and adopted by everybody. It became the textbook definition of how to build a high-fidelity amplifier. When pioneer engineers sat down to design the SX-1980 or Marantz designed the 2500, they weren't struggling to figure out how to make it sound good. They already knew how. They simply took Locanthi's fundamental topology and scaled it up. They added higher voltage rails. They added massive current reserves. They added more output devices in parallel. But the heart of the machine, the topology that guaranteed the fidelity, was the same circuit Bart Locanthi finalized in 1966. By the time the middle 70s rolled around, the big three had a marketing nightmare because all of them were the same. Everybody had the same power receiver. Everybody had the same distortion rating. So one manufacturer comes out with a claim that their amp's 0.03% total harmonic distortion. The next manufacturer comes out and says, well, ours is 0.02. Would it matter? You couldn't hear either one. It wouldn't matter if it was 0.05, 0.02, whatever. So it made no difference. So they had to differentiate themselves from each other in another way. And the way they did that was the beginning of the power wars. The power wars started because effectively, quality was maxed out across the industry. The only variable left to manipulate was quantity. The manufacturers realized if they couldn't sell you on purity, they would have to sell you on headroom. They sold the idea that infinite power meant effortless dynamics, that having 270 watts on tap meant your music would never clip, never strain, and never compress. Power war wasn't a distraction from sound quality, it was a victory lap. It was the industry saying, we have mastered the circuit. Now let's see how far we can push the physics. The innovation wasn't in the topology, the innovation was in the manufacturing, the ability to mass produce high voltage output transistors, the ability to wind massive toroidal transformers cheaply. They didn't sell you better sound, they sold you headroom. They sold you the ability to drive inefficient speakers to concert levels without clipping, and they sold you bragging rights. Was it glorious? Absolutely. These machines are masterpieces of industrial engineering. They are muscle cars, big block V8s going in a straight line. It's not finesse, it's force. And in the late 70s, force was what sold. The real war, the sound quality war, was fought and won decades earlier by men most enthusiasts have never heard of. H.C. Lin, he gave us the architecture, the differential input, the quasi-complementary circuit. He taught silicon how to sing without destroying itself. Bart Locanthi, the president of engineering at JBL and later Pioneer, he gave us symmetry. He gave us stability. These monsters didn't need to invent new fidelity. They just had to scale it up. Lin and Locanthi built the road. The power wars just drove a muscle car down it at 200 miles an hour. If you enjoyed the video, I hope you leave me a like. If you're not subscribed, I hope you leave subscribed. And if you are subscribed, as always, you know how much I appreciate you guys who've hung in there with me. Y'all have a good day.